Shabbat Shalom, everyone. We're gathered today on the 18th of the 10th month on our Creator's calendar, which happens to line up with the 28th of 2024, the December on the Gregorian calendar. And we are continuing with our study and read through of the book of Exodus or Shemot, and we are currently on chapter 13. The children have been in Egypt for 215 years. They had been plagued or oppressed by the Egyptians or the Mitzrayites. Moshe was sent to deliver them. They've had all the plagues, some of them affecting everyone, some of them a distinction being made after the grumbling had ceased between the people of Yahuwah and the heathen, if you will, that were oppressing them. And then they were delivered, the firstborn being slain of every man and beast that did not offer the Passover lamb and put the blood over the door as a type of the offering that our Mashiach would do in the future. And now they are delivered from that. And they've left on the 15th of the third month, or sorry, the 15th of the first month, the Feast of Unleavened Bread there. You can notice it is a Sabbath that was instituted after that, but on this day they left Egypt and they were migrating, right? So it is the appointed time to commemorate his deliverances in that capacity. And later on, it was also commemorated as the day where the truth was buried in the earth and for his emissaries. And that is much later on. But right here, chapter 13, this is where you can see a type of the renewed covenant happening, where it was foretold that the kahuna would go to Louis until he came and gave him the truth. And that was a type of that happens right here, where he says that the firstborn that opens the womb is his, and he even allows them as Kohanim to do offerings before the golden calf incident. And then after that, it's again given to the sons of Louis as a type until he comes. So it was an echo and then a fulfillment of that very thing again, if you will. But right here it says, and Yahuwah spoke to Moshe, saying, sanctify or set apart to me every firstborn, first produced, opening every womb among the children of Israel, both of man and beast. It is mine. Now, Hebrew doesn't have a gender neutral, so it's either male or female. And in this instance, it says every man here. While they say children up there, it would be sons literally. And it is only the male child that opens the womb, whether it's the firstborn or the third or 15th. It's the male that is set apart to Yahuwah for service and not a woman. That's just how it's established in the covenant here. People might take a sec, be upset about that, or for whatever reasons, they explain why in scripture. It just is what it is. So I don't want to get too far into that one. This is, and Moshe said to the people, remember this day in which you came forth out of the land of Mitzrayim, Egypt, out of the house of slavery. It says bondage here, but that word literally is obedim, like Obed. It says Ebed there, and they have a double sigol there. For anyone who's not familiar, the vowel points, there's a lot of contention about them, and I didn't have an opinion one way or another. When I was first learning, I wanted to reject them completely, and then I realized that that might not be something that we ought to do because they were made for a purpose. I didn't know what that purpose was, but generally, it seems to be pointing out the accurate way to read things. It has been used, however, to hide information. They translate it with vowel points to mean one thing when it really means something else, and they do that to hide messianic foretellings. That's a fact that's provable in the Masoretic text when compared to the Septuagint, and you can see it in a few other ways as well. There's a book written by a gentleman who wrote uh, quite extensively. We've shared some of the information before, but he was a Chaldean, or he was a Scottish Highlander, if you will, from the Highlands of Caledonia that spoke the Gaelic from Caledonia, the Highlands there. And he connected that language with the Hebrew. He wrote a book about how they were related. He wrote a book about how that Gaelic language, the Chaldean Hebrew, was the progenitor of ancient Greek and ancient Latin, and shows how the migrations of the Hebrews perfectly line up with the language shifting the way he shares in the books, and it perfectly lines up with the history of the ancient history of Caledonia, and the ancient history or ancient list of the British kings, where it talks about how Brutus was the first king of Britain, and he came from Italy, from the survivors of Troy, and all of that ties together, where you have the Hebrew mixing in with the Greek, mixing with the Latin. So all that to say, he wrote another book specifically about how the vowel points hide how you read it. And you can read all of the Hebrew just using the Gaelic pronunciation or the Gaelic use of vowels, how it's used in the Celtic. You can supply that directly for the Hebrew and read them perfectly. And it's almost exactly how it would sound in English in a lot of ways. So there's a lot more involved in things. This vowel points are directly used today to hide things that we would see a lot easier. Even being eben, a stone, is very easy to see, but it's hidden today. Oven or over being Ivrit or Hebrew, you can't see that at all, but literally the word over comes from that, and it's to cross over is the meaning. So there's tons of things like that that we'd be able to see a lot easier if these vowel points weren't mucking things up. But even with them there, you can still see stuff if you look at the sense and meaning. Remove vowels, or you play around with the vowels, because the English has done that quite extensively. If you just go back a few hundred years, we didn't have a standard spelling in English in our country, and vowels were very fluent. Um, but the further back you go into the Old English, the more you can see the uses of Hebrew with our Old English specifically. You can see the uses of how Hebrew would function with how the vowels would change as well. Give, gat, and things of that nature. But getting back on point here, it says, "And Moshe said to the people, remember this day in which you came forth out of the land of Mitzrayim, out of the house of slavery, for with a strong hand Yahuwah brought you forth thence, and leaven shall not be eaten. For on this day you go forth in the month of new," and then it says corn, right? But in the month of new corn, or Abib. "And it shall come to pass when Yahuwah your Elohim shall have brought you into the land of the Canaanim and the Hittim and the Amorim and the Hivittim and the Yebusim and the Girgashim and the Pezarim, which ye swear to your fathers to give you, a land flowing with milk and honey, that you shall perform this service in this month. 6 days you shall eat unleavened bread, and on the seventh day is a feast to Yahuwah. 7 days shall you eat unleavened bread. Nothing leavened shall be seen with you, neither shall you have leaven in all your borders." And this word for leaven here is chametz, right? Or that actually says swelling or fermentation, so that's not even the same one. But that gives you the leavened bread right here. There, that's the chametz. And that word specifically is the starter for sourdough, like the unleavened starter sourdough mix where it's fermented. That is chametz. You're not to have that in your dwellings. So these mothers that are really, really old, it wouldn't be a thing for Hebrews. If you're keeping his word, you get rid of it every year and you start fresh. We've had to do that a few times. The other word for leaven here is to ferment. So you're not to have the chametz shall not be with you, and neither will it be leavened in all your quarters. So nothing fermented. Any bread that's been fermented by a different means, like non-sourdough with baking soda or things of that nature, you're not to have that finished product with you, and you're not to have chametz at all. I'm hoping that makes things clear for people. I used to do the same thing. I'd throw out all the baking soda, get all rid of everything that we thought anything leavened or whatever, or a leavening agent, but that's not what it says. It's not what you have to do. His word is not, it's not a bondage like that. It's good to be zealous. If that's what your conscience is doing and that's what you did because you felt it was right, it is good to be zealous. Zealotry got a eternal covenant for people. So I'm not going to discourage that, but it's good to be zealous with knowledge. And as we go, we want to learn and conform. That's the whole point. So if you don't know about that, I encourage you to dig into them. The unleavened bread is matzah, right? Leavened bread is chametz, and that is literally the sourdough, right? Fermented sourdough rises of itself through fermentation. That's the reason why it was unleavened, is because they didn't have time to let it rise on its own. And then you had just regular lemon, or leaven rather, is what is the swelling by fermentation. It's not necessarily the chametz itself. It says, and you shall tell your son in that day, saying, therefore Yahuwah dealt with me thus as I was going out of Mitzrayim. And it shall be to you a sign upon your hand and a memorial before your eyes. So doing these things, keeping the days of unleavened bread, and talking to them about your children when they ask, will be the sign that it is upon your hand because you're doing it, and the memorial between your eyes because you're thinking about the word and speaking of it. That the law of Yahuwah may be in your mouth, for with a strong hand Yahuwah Elohim brought you out of Mitzrayim. This is the literal interpretation, that it's a spiritual sign for what you're doing. But one of the things with people that are going apostate is that they spiritualize the literal and they literalize the spiritual. And you can see that both with the Yahudim that have rejected him and the synagogue of Satan with Rome that mocks him. They literalize the spiritual in both in this various capacity. The Yahudim that rejected the truth will wrap a band around their arm and tie a phylactery around their head, literally fulfilling this when it ought to be the things they're doing in obedience to the truth here. And then the Romans put a literal mark on the hand and forehead instead of being the actions of obedience. So I just want to point that out because that's a common thing that's done. The spiritual is literalized and the literal is spiritualized when you're walking incorrectly. This is, and preserve you this law according to the times of the seasons from year to year. And it shall come to pass when Yahuwah your Elohim shall bring you into the land of the Canaanim, as he swore to your fathers, and shall give it you, that you shall set apart every opening the womb, every offspring opening the womb. The males belong to Yahuwah, right? The males to Yahuwah. Everyone that opens the womb out of the herds or among the cattle, as many as you shall have, you shall set apart the males to Yahuwah. Every offspring opening the womb of the donkey, you shall charge or change for a sheep. And if you will not change it, you shall redeem it. Every firstborn of man of your sons shall you redeem. Now, if you remember, we've talked about it before, Hagar being the first covenant in Mount Sinai of Arabia as a parable, meaning that Ishmael would be the first covenant believers. And they are equated, he was equated to a wild donkey man, if you remember. The wild donkey, or the stubborn horse that doesn't do what it's commanded without bit and bridle, is the type of stubbornness that his believers had that he wanted to correct. The whole golden calf incident and the whole training period after he gave the commandments and before he came in the flesh was to correct that kind of thing, like a stubborn donkey. And in a parable form right here, he tells them that every donkey that is not, it has to be changed for a sheep or a lamb. You have to redeem it. And if you don't, you break its neck. That's a parable trying to show that we need our Redeemer. But people that won't accept that that donkey is first covenant believers, or how we are before he came, if you will, you can't really see that or accept it. It might be insulting to people to be equated to that, but that's exactly what the scriptures do. And it's a lot more insulting to us if you ever take the time to look. One of the things that I'd mentioned to my boys the other day when we were reading through the good news accounts, as we're doing at night, is that whenever anyone comes to the truth, he points out the things that were offensive to him in, and it's never pleasant. So it always seems like I mean, he could be seeming to be rude or offensive to people, but it's the condition of what happens when we come to the truth. He points out our flaws. He points out the things in which we fail him at. It's just a natural consequence of what is. But we won't accept that, or we won't see that if we don't acknowledge the truth. This is why he tells us to get the plank out of our own eye first, and to make sure that you take his words and see if you're walking correctly, so that we're not a hypocrite in our judgment and perverted. But either way, it says, and if your son should ask you hereafter, saying, what is this? Then you shall say to him, with a strong hand Yahuwah brought us out of Mitzrayim, out of the house of bondage. And when Pharaoh hardened to send us away, he slew every firstborn in the land of Mitzrayim, both the firstborn of man and the firstborn of beast. Therefore do I sacrifice every offspring that opens the womb, the males to Yahuwah, and every firstborn of my sons I will redeem. Now, this is a thing. The righteous walk out what is done by the truth perpetually. And you can see that from the times of the beginning on. Noah kept remembrance days that are literally kept by all believers for all time in covenant and will be forever. It's the new months as the Chodesh and the Sabbaths, right? We're all going to appear before him. So those kind of things that are established in time that are kept perpetually by the righteous, they weren't from the beginning in creation. They came in the course of time, but we perpetually keep them as a sign of what the truth has done or is doing or will do in the world. It's also, the Reading rehearsal, as we're all familiar with. This is right here, sorry, verse 16. And it shall be for a sign upon your hand, and immovable before your eyes. For with a strong hand Yahuwah brought you out of Mitzrayim. And when Pharaoh sent forth the people, Elohim led them not by the way of the land of the Philistines, because it was near. For Elohim said, Least at any time the people repent when they see war, and return to Mitzrayim. They didn't have weapons when they first left, but they were given weapons after the Egyptians were flooded or destroyed with the waters. Ron Wyatt talks about this a little more. I was not familiar with it at all, but after the Egyptians were destroyed, the Hebrews plundered their goods just like they've done countless times when enemies come at them, and then the enemy was destroyed by our Creator and their goods were left for plunder. That happened to them here in the wilderness as well, and this is why they had swords when they were fighting against Amalek later on. I did not make that connection myself, so all credit to Ron Wyatt and his studies for what he had done. If you want to get in depth about where they were, where the Exodus, Red Sea crossing, or the Sea of Reeds crossing happened at the Strait of Aqaba there, and all the information about where they traveled, where Mount Sinai is, there's a great amount of detail, the great work done by our late brother Ron Wyatt and others after him or in conjunction with him that can share that. So we'll put some stuff in the description or the comments if we can, and you guys should be all familiar with it. I've been sharing about that for years now, but we just had some a few months ago too. I've been digging into those as they pop up. The Ark Files, Discovery Media, Ron Wyatt. Um, these are all YouTube channels that are releasing new content. Well, not new, it's all from the 80s and 70s and whatnot, but never before released or not publicly released in a long time information about Ron Wyatt's discoveries, his interviews and things on the TV that happened at that time. It's very interesting. I highly encourage you guys and anyone to look that stuff up. He was a man that was led by our creator, very humble, to discover very relevant things for our times when I was just a boy. He literally discovered the Ark of the Covenant's location January 6th, 1982. The very the significance of that, just like the declaration of, I'm sorry, the ratification of the Bill of Rights, I believe, was done December 25th, 1789 in our country. A direct slap in the face to Satan on his appointed time. The very finding of the ark on January 6th is another one, boom, direct slap in the face on that kind of thing too, because on the Gregorian calendar, the Christ Mass is the 25th of December, but on the Julian calendar, it was January 6th. So the two dates are connected in that fashion. If you remember, there was a 10-day period where date changes had to go out throughout as people adopted the Gregorian calendar throughout the world in history. You can look that up, but those are why those are significant. And our creator, in contradiction or mocking those things, have his things happen directly on those times, just like Antiochus did what he did and profaning the temple. And then at that very same time, the Maccabees rededicated and cleansed it the very same day. You can see that thing happening in contrast with what our creators allowed men to do, discovering the Ark on January 6th, the Bill of Rights, liberty of conscience enumerated on December 25th. These are directly contradictory to Satan and oppression and darkness and all those things. So, continuing real quick. It says, and when Pharaoh sent forth the people, Elohim led them not by the way of the Philistines because it was near. For Elohim said, at least at any time the people repent when they see war and return to Mitzrayim. And Elohim led the people round by the way to the wilderness, to the Yam Suf, right? Or it says Red Sea here. And in the fifth generation, the children of Yisrael went up out of the land of Mitzrayim. So fifth generation from, you have Yaakov, Louis, Kohath, Amram, Miriam, Aaron, or Aharon, and Moshe, excuse me. That was the fifth generation from Yaakov who went in. That is not 430 years, as we've already talked about. So you all should know by now, it was 215 years in the land of Canaan, 215 years in the land of Mitzrayim, and then they were at Mount Sinai exactly 430 years from the day, the 15th of the third month, the very day Yahuwah, our Mashiach, Father through our Mashiach, gave the promise to Abraham. It says, and Moshe took the bones of Yahusuf with him, for he had solemnly adjured the children of Israel, saying, Elohim will surely visit you, and you shall carry up my bones hence with you. And the children of Israel departed from Sukkoth and encamped in Otham by the wilderness. And Elohim led them in the day by a pillar of cloud to show them the way, and in the night by a pillar of fire. And the pillar of cloud failed not by day, nor the pillar of fire by night before all the people, which that phenomenon is foretold to happen again during the millennial reign, or at the beginning of the consummations of the times, if you will, where over his people you will always have the pillar of fire by night or cloud cover by day over their habitations, but not over everyone. That would be for everyone who is born again and of the first resurrection and made like the messengers. They're going to have his esteem and covering, not the normal mortal people necessarily. All right, chapter 14. And Yahuwah spoke to Moshe, saying, Speak to the children of Yisrael, and let them turn and encamp before the village between Migdol and the sea, opposite Baal Zephon. Before them shall you encamp by the sea. Zephon is to be hidden, to go to the north, to code or decode. So the Lord of what is hidden, right? Is what I think that means. Either way, this is where the Migdol, the Straits, if you've ever seen the area where they're talking about, there's a mountain range. It opens up. There's a small trail between mountains that you can't fit very many people through wide. But once you get into it, it's a wide plain that opens up into the Sea of Reeds. All on either side were mountains, and at one point the mountain literally went right into the water. Since the more modern times, the Egyptian government blew out the mountains that were going into the water there, so it was opened up to stop piracy or trafficking. So you can see a little bit more into the land, but it's still covered by mountains. You can't go far before they go into the water still. And the whole area was literally stuck between the mountains on one side, and then you had an army, Egyptian garrison that was there. And from the garrison and then the army coming through, the people were pigeonholed between the mountains and the water. It says, and Pharaoh will say to his people, as for these children of Israel, they are wandering in the land, for the wilderness has shut them in. And I will harden the heart of Pharaoh, and he shall pursue after them, and I will be esteemed in Pharaoh, and in all his host, and all the Mitzraites, or Egyptians, shall know that I am Yahuwah, and they did so. And it was reported to the king of the Mitzraites that the people fled, or had fled, and the heart of Pharaoh was turned, and that of his servants against the people. And they said, What is this that we have done to let the children of Israel go, so that they should not serve us? Now, it doesn't mention it here, but when we get to it, the book of Yobelim gives a little more detail. Yahuwah had Satan imprisoned or trapped for the first few days while the children were making their getaway here. And then after the Shabbat, he let him go so that he roused Pharaoh to go chase him down. And then they met at the Sea of Reeds here, so that at the end of the festival of unleavened bread, or the last day of the festival, is when the Red Sea crossing happens, and he delivers them with a great victory. And that's why the first and the last days are Sabbaths, to commemorate these things. We don't see it so clearly here, but it's made a little more clear with the calendar information from the Dead Sea Scrolls and the other writings that are hidden. Verse 6 says, So Pharaoh yoked his chariots and led off all his people with himself, having also taken 600 chosen chariots and all the cavalry of the Mitzraites and rulers over all. The 600 chosen chariots were the 600 chariots that had like golden wheels. They're the really special bougie ones, if you want to call it that. But the Egyptian military at that time was some 20,000 chariots. That was recorded in different histories with the battles they were having contemporary to that time, and they were all taken out right here. It says, And Yahuwah hardened the heart of Pharaoh, the king of Mitzrayim, and of his servants, and he pursued after the children of Israel. And the children of Israel went forth with a high hand. And the Mitzraites pursued after them, and found them encamped by the sea, and all the cavalry and the chariots of Pharaoh, and the horsemen, and his host before the village over against Baal Zephon. It doesn't give you exact numbers here, but it mentions in the Chokmah Shalomo, or the Wisdom of Solomon, that for every child that was killed by the Egyptians when they were born, for the 7 months that they murdered the children there, 1,000 men died. And so there was 1,000,000 men taken out here for every uh, one of the children there. Whether or not those are exact numbers, I can't say, but I'm trying to give you what I know to be written. And you guys can check that out at your leisure. Or when we get to it in the course of time, of course, we'll read through it here. And it says, And Pharaoh approached, and the children of Israel, having looked up, beheld, and the Mitzraites encamped behind them. And they were very greatly terrified. And the children of Israel cried out to Yahuwah and said to Moshe, Because there were no graves in the land of Mitzrayim, have you brought us forth to slay in the wilderness? What is this that you have done to us, having brought us out of Mitzrayim? Is not this the word which we spoke to you in Mitzrayim, saying, Let us alone that we may serve the Mitzrayites? For it is better for us to serve the Mitzrayites than to die in this wilderness. And that was the grumbling that we read about, that it was not covered in the normal scriptures, but it is in that missing section that we followed along, right? And Moshe said to the people, Be of good courage, stand and see the deliverance which is from Yahuwah, which he will work for us this day. For as you have seen the Mitzraites today, you shall see them again no more forever. Yahuwah shall fight for you, and you shall hold your shalom. And Yahuwah said to Moshe, Why cry you to me? Speak to the children of Yisrael, and let them proceed. And do you lift up your rod, and stretch forth your hand over the sea, and divide it, and let the children of Yisrael enter into the midst of the sea on the dry land. And behold, I will harden the heart of Pharaoh and of all the Mitzraites, and they shall go in after them. And I will be esteemed upon Pharaoh and on all his host, and on his chariots and his horses. And all the Mitzraites shall know that I am Yahuwah. I am he who causes it to be. We've gone over that word before. Who, Yahi, the to be, to exist, I am, right? It's what causes it to be, what falls about. He's literally the one who makes whatever is happen. It says, They'll know that I am Yahuwah when I am esteemed upon Pharaoh and upon his chariots and upon his horses. And the messenger of Elohim that went before the camp of the children of Israel removed and went behind. And the pillar of the cloud also removed from before them and stood behind them. And it went between the camp of the Mitzraites and the camp of Yisrael and stood. And there was darkness and blackness. And the night passed, and they came not near to one another during the whole night. So this is where he stood between them. And the part where the pillar of fire and the cloud stood, you actually have that the ground is melted there. Still to this day, you can find it's like the sand is like glass. It's all melted hard. Both Ron Wyatt found that, and there was a more recent video. The Founded Earth Brothers YouTube channel, he has a video where they show the molten sand and where the pillar of fire had stood there. So it's really amazing. But it's evidence of the facts of these things being true. And it went, I already read that one, sorry. And Moshe stretched forth his hand over the sea, and Yahuwah carried back the sea with a strong south wind all the night, and made the sea dry, and the water was divided. And the children of Israel went into the midst of the sea on dry land, and the water of it was a wall on the right hand and a wall on the left. I believe later on it mentions that it's actually congealed as a wall there. And that goes right in line with what is in the recognitions of Clement, talking about how it was like it was congealed, like as with frost, exactly like as the firmament was made, awesome like ice like crystal, which is also mentioned in Amos and Ezekiel and the Dead Sea Scrolls, where the firmament is equated to awesome ice like crystal. We, in modern times, scientists call it sky ice. The Founded Earth Brothers also have a video about that, which is pretty interesting. But it was the witness of someone who was not a believer at the time, who, because he was questioned on whether or not he was religious and what his beliefs were, and because he was an atheist, he was allowed to go there. He didn't believe in the Bible or have any regard for that, and that's the only reason I'm fairly certain he was allowed to have that area. But he was shown these things, and later on, when people were talking about the firmament, he became a witness to the truth and shared what he knew. So I would recommend everyone watch that video too. I'll go ahead and share it in the comments or description as well. But we'll continue. And it says, and the Mitzrites pursued them and went in after them, and every horse of Pharaoh and his chariots and his horsemen into the midst of the sea. And it came to pass in the morning watch that Yahuwah looked forth on the camp of the Mitzrites through the pillar of fire and cloud. You see, it was Yahuwah is that messenger of Elohim that was standing there, who is the one that has the Father's name in him, who spoke to Moshe and came in the flesh. He's actually called Yahuwah in the renewed covenant as well, twice in the book of Luke at least. When he's born, it mentions by the messengers that in the city of Dawid, a deliverer, Mashiach Yahuwah, has been born. And then at the death of him, or at his resurrection, when Miriam went to his tomb, it says, and the Yahuwah Yahushua was not there. So there's many other references to him being called Yahuwah, but this is some of the most blatantly obvious places that you can see the messenger of Elohim, the Melech, who is Elohim, who is called Yahuwah, who's the one doing these things. He's the one that speaks and it happens, right? And if you listen, our Mashiach doesn't change, and he came and told us all these things if we only pay attention. But he looked through the camp of the Mitzrites, the pillar of fire and cloud, and troubled the camp of the Mitzrites, and bound the axle trees of their chariots, and caused them to go with difficulty. And the Mitzrites said, let us flee from the face of Yisrael, for Yahuwah fights for them against the Mitzrites, or Egyptians. And Yahuwah said to Moshe, stretch forth your hand over the sea, and let the water be turned back to its place, and let it cover the Mitzrites, both upon the chariots and the riders. And Moshe stretched forth his hand over the sea, and the water returned to its place toward day, and the Mitzrites fled from the water. And Yahuwah shook off the Mitzrites in the midst of the sea, and the water returned and covered the chariots and the riders, and all the forces of Pharaoh, who entered after them into the sea, and there was not left of them even one. But the children of Israel went along dry land in the midst of the sea, and the water was to them a wall on the right hand and a wall on the left. So Yahuwah delivered Israel in that day from the hand of the Mitzrites. And Yisrael saw the Mitzrites dead by the shore of the sea. And that's probably when they plundered them. And Yisrael saw the mighty hand, that which Yahuwah did to the Mitzrites. And the people feared Yahuwah, and they believed Elohim and Moshe, his servant. And that's that wow moment. They've had plenty of them, but that was the one that kicked in for them, apparently. The day in that day. Yes, there's allusions to that in that day. It talks about that. There's allusions to the third day as well, and those are significant for a variety of reasons in regard to our Mashiach, of course, and his body. After 2 days, he will revive us like the revivals, and in the third day, he will lift us up, and we shall always be before him, right? This is chapter 15. Now, this is the song of Moshe, as mentioned with the song of the Lamb. The song of the Lamb is in the book of Gad the Seer, and it is very much like this, talking about the horse and the rider being thrown into the sea. But it's well after these times, and it's not talking about Pharaoh and his armies necessarily, but the horse Hasus and what that means, which we all know that that word came down to us, is what they call our Messiah today. And then the one riding it would be Satan. Those are going to be thrown into the sea at the deliverance of his people. This is again, it's something that might be an affront or offensive to many people, but the truth does that to us if we want to be humble and admit it, right? And I'm not saying that to be spiteful or anything. It does it to me too. Everybody has fallen short of perfection. Everyone, when they come to the truth, unless they're a raging hypocrite or delusional, will find where the truth rebukes the things that we have done wrong. That is the nature of him. That's why he says, for those who draw near to me, let me be set apart. That's why when Aharon's children came with profane fire after they were commanded not to, they were burnt up. He can't, this is why the Father has not dealt with his creation personally, because he is perfect. He is without compromise or diminishing. You cannot, we couldn't survive in his presence without being burnt up. But our Mashiach has diminished himself for our sakes so that we can draw back to the truth. That is the whole point and purpose of the reconciliation in his work for what he's done for us. But it culminates in the horse, Hasus, and the rider being thrown into the sea. And all these things are both literal, it had already happened, and spiritual, the things that will happen in a parable form. You just have to look up what scripture says about who's the rider, who's the horse, what's the sea. The Holy Sea is another one where the horse and the rider are currently in the midst of right now. It's all true. And it's stuff that's foretold in a parable, right? But it says, then sang Moshe and the children of Yisrael this song to Elohim and spoke, saying, let us sing to Yahuwah, for he is greatly exalted. The horse and the rider he has thrown into the sea. He was to me a helper and protector for deliverance. This is my Elohim, and I will esteem him. My father's El, and I will exalt him. Yahuwah bringing wars to naught. Yahuwah is his name. And that's what he's going to do, bring an end to fighting, causing all fighting to cease. He's going to take the sword and put it into a plowshare. This is even mentioned that we're going to be participating in doing that, bringing all war to naught in Yechezkiel or Ezekiel 39, where we were talking about that earlier before we were recording, how all of that tied together with Yeshayahu 66, also going along with what's in chapter 10, the Peshars for it in the Dead Sea Scrolls, Gog and Magog being equated with the Kittim and how that tied in there. So all of this stuff, Father willing, as we go through and you're learning, you'll see that he literally has laid out everything for us. It's all in parables to keep those that should not know, in delusion. But those that have a reasonable mind, that willingly are obedient, he shows the comprehension, shows the truth of these things too. It says, he has cast the chariots of Pharaoh and his host into the sea, the chosen mounted captains or princes. They were swallowed up in the Yam Suf, or Sea of Reeds. He covered them with the sea. They sank to the depth like a stone. The right hand, or your right hand, Elohim, has been esteemed in strength. Your right hand, Elohim, has broken the enemies. And in the abundance of your esteem, you have broken the adversaries to pieces. You sent forth your wrath. It devoured them as stubble. And by the breath of your anger, the water parted asunder. The waters were congealed as a wall, and the waves were congealed in the midst of the sea. The enemy said, I will pursue, I will overtake, I will divide the spoils, I will satisfy my soul, I will destroy with my sword, my hand shall have dominion. You sent forth your wind, the sea covered them. They sank like dead in the might, or like lead in the mighty water. Who is like to you among the Elohim, Yahuwah? Who is like to you, esteemed in set apartness, marvelous in esteems, doing wonders? You stretched forth your right hand, the earth swallowed them up. You have guided in your righteousness this your people, whom you have redeemed. By your strength, you have called them into your set apart resting place. Now, this is all literal. He delivered them, the lamb slain, took him out of Egypt, but it's a parable of the things that he would do later on, if you can see it. The deliverances with the lamb redeeming his people during these times, right? The nations heard and were angry. Pains have seized on the dwellers among the Philistines. Then the Philistines were Greek pirates that came to live in the land. The Greeks were amalgamated, paganized Hebrews, if you remember, okay, for context. Then the princes of Edom and the chiefs of the Moabites hastened. Trembling took hold upon them. All the inhabitants of Canaan melted away. Let trembling and fear fall upon them. By the greatness of your arm, let them become as stone. Tell your people pass over, Yahuwah. Tell this your people, pass over, whom you have purchased. Now that word for Passover is obed. They say a bar there, right? To cross over. Now, in the Hebrew, that's literally an ayin, bet, resh, or literally an O, the letter O. The bet is a B or a V sound in the original Hebrew, depending on the context. And then the resh. So you have over. That's literally the word over, and it means over. That's what I was trying to talk to you about. Some of these things are very easy to see, but some of them not so much. Passing over, obed, or not, not obed, sorry, that's obedience. But a bar there is literally the word over with different vowels. But in this instance, like I was trying to tell you, the vowel points, the intentional changing of the vowels there hides that. So to continue here, he's still singing. He says, bring them in and plant them in the mountain of your inheritance, in your prepared habitation, which you, Yahuwah, have prepared, the sanctuary, Yahuwah, which your hands have made ready. Yahuwah reigns forever and ever and ever. Or that one would probably say, Yahuwah reigns unto ages, Leolam, right? Wa'ed, or and witnessed forever. For the horse of Pharaoh went in with the chariots and horsemen into the sea, and Yahuwah brought upon them the water of the sea, but the children of Yisrael walked through dry land in the midst of the sea. And Miriam, the female foreteller, the sister of Aharon, having taken a timbrel in her hand, then went forth. Then there went forth all the women after her with timbrels and dances. So after the sunrise on the 15th, or yeah, I think it's the 15th. No, I'm sorry. The 27th, right? The sunrise on that seventh day there after the deliverance here. Now they're celebrating or keeping a festival. They're celebrating the deliverance they just had. And that is the set apart day, the last day of unleavened bread after his resurrection, that we're supposed to be keeping the celebration and festival for the deliverances that we've received. Same type and picture, though. It's the same pattern we're walking out still, just like the 4 Chodeshim, just like the other festivals that were given in Leviticus 23. And for those that are paying attention or feeling like they're inclined to keep it, it's the same reason why you would keep Purim and the rededication, because it was instituted by believers and kept by sincere truth followers, carried down as a memorial for the deliverances he has given, and for no other purpose. But those are not dogmatically commanded. However, I think if you're of Yahuda, you should take into consideration that it is directly meaning you, whether or not that's literal or spiritual, Yahuda, right? I've heard a lot of people, messianic believers, if you will, Hebrew roots, whatever you want to call them, followers of the way, they say that they don't want to keep the rededication, and I can fully agree that I don't keep the way that they do with the Hanukkah lights and giving gifts and all that stuff. It's just a mockery of Christmas. That is not what it's all about. If you read the books and the actual accounts that we have of that, the rededication is to rededicate it from paganism, from profane worship of the false sun deity and the pig, slaughtering sacrifices and partaking of them, and calling it a festival to Yahuwah. Removing that thing and rededicating to his stuff is all about what Hanukkah is about. We shared that, we've read over it, the 3 accounts in Josephus and in scripture in the Maccabees. And then we also read about in the book of Daniel, where it foretold those events and the fulfillment of it. So we just shared that recently in the chat. I'll go ahead and share that in the description here too when I get a chance. So anyone that wants to can look at that for their consideration. But we'll continue here. Miriam's version of the song in the Dead Sea Scrolls shows that it contained a lot more than what we have here, but it's in fragments and you really can't make any sense or reason of it. However, this is all we have is a sentence or two. In there, it's like a whole paragraph that's missing. But it says, and Miriam led them singing or saying, let us sing to Yahuwah, for he has been greatly esteemed. The horse and the rider has been cast into the sea. So Moshe brought up the children of Israel from the reed sea and brought them into the wilderness of Shur. And they went 3 days in the wilderness and found no water. That would have put them at the Shabbat right there, right? Or right there on the getting on prep day is the last day they've been traveling. And they came to Mara and could not drink of Mara, for it was bitter. Therefore, he named the name of that place Bitterness, or Mara. And the people murmured against Moshe, saying, what shall we drink? And Moshe cried to Yahuwah, and Yahuwah showed him a tree, and he cast it into the water, and the water was sweetened. There he established to him ordinances and judgments. Someone was asking for them the statute. What are the words there? Hok. The hok is an enactment, an appointment, a statute. Okay. A commandment is usually what they put that for. And an ordinance is a mitzvot. The mitzvot is like, they call them ordinances here. The Yahudim, they think their mitzvot are like their good works. They're good deeds that they do. Okay. It's the sentence or the decree. It's the formal thing that he says, this is the right or this is not. And then you have the Torot or instructions. So those are the different words that you have. I know, I think it was Brother Earl was talking about that. We'll go over them more later though, okay? Right here, this is another parable. After his death and resurrection, the waters were bitter, but the tree being put in them made it sweet, right? There's a whole picture here with his death bringing the bitterness of the waters to become sweetness to people. the condemnation in the word now bringing life or refreshment, if you will. And he said, if you will indeed hear the voice of Yahuwah your Elohim and do things pleasing before him, and will hearken to his commands and keep all his ordinances, no disease which I have brought upon the Mitzraites will I bring upon you. For I am Yahuwah your Elohim that heals you. I can personally vouchsafe for this. I have, since we started keeping the truth and we turned to him in sincerity, we stopped eating things that are not food. And that means it doesn't matter. You call it organic or whatever, but I look at it this way. If there's chemicals and a list of ingredients that are not clearly what he said is food, and they put it in stuff, that makes it no longer food to me. And that's what I was convicted in. So we spend a lot of money trying to have organic food for our family. But the benefit of that is that we're healthy. We have sound minds. We can think and reason. We don't get sick nearly as much as people do otherwise all the time. Now, outside of that, there are things that can cause people to get sick. And while you might find the reason or a worldly reason in the means, the real reason is that he said it would happen, and his word is reality. The ways that in which it happens are the means through which his word functions, but his word has it. That makes it what is real. Obedience to the truth makes you free from disease. And that is something that you can see all over scripture. Um, Whenever you're suffering from a calamity, there is only two, and this is what we've tried to talk to people about, and I try to be honest with you guys as well. We have to do self-reflection. Any ailment, any problem that you have is an evil, and evil is a curse. Curse does not come without a cause. The curse causeless comes not, right? That's scripture. So it stands to reason if we're suffering, it's either for something that we have done, it is for something that we are doing, or it is for righteousness' sake. That is the only options. Now, I'm not one to just sit there and suffer and let it happen and just go, well, such is life. I like to think about why. What in particularly, what did I do to deserve this? And I found that almost every time I've ever suffered anything in my life, I've absolutely deserved it for the things I'm doing. And that includes being sick. I haven't personally been sick in a few years now. I've had some of my family do it, but simple obedience to the truth brings healing. When I do things that are not right, or when I've done something perverted or evil and I know is wrong, I've actually gotten sick again. I've had my only migraine in my life when I did something evil. It was the first headache I've ever had, and it was so bad I saw color, literally a ball of pulsating rainbow color in front of my vision. Never happened in my life before, and I acknowledged the truth. I dealt with that, and then I didn't do that thing again. I haven't suffered after that either. So I'm not telling everybody that's ever suffering, even if they're suffering right now, "Oh, it's because you're a wicked, evil sinner and it's what you're doing." It's not my point. I'm not trying to shut anyone down or hurt your feelings. Self-reflection. This is the whole point. It says that look, keep your feet or keep your eyes on your own path and your eyelids on your own feet, right? Look at your path and get the plank out of your own eye. That's the whole point of everything that we should be reading. Self-assessment, because if you don't love yourself with a willingness to correct the evil, you can't truly love anyone else. That's written in the recognitions. Paraphrasing, but that's the recognitions. The recognitions of Clement, which is the teachings, the preaching, and the expounding of the truth by Kepha, Simon Peter or Shimon Kepha. But we'll go ahead and finish here real quick. It says, and you will indeed hear the voice of Yahuwah your Elohim and do things pleasing before him and will hearken to his commands and keep all his ordinances. No disease which I have brought upon the Mitzraites will I bring upon you, for I am Yahuwah your Elohim that heals you. And they came to Elim, and there were 12 fountains of water, and 70 stems of palm trees, and they encamped there by the waters. And after the tree made the waters sweet, after the lamb was sacrificed for the people and they crossed through the waters and were immersed, these are all parables of renewed covenant things, right? Then the emissaries, the 12 emissaries and the 70 taught ones were there as a refreshing and a teaching and a provision, which is what's alluded to in parable form right here with the fountains and palm trees. That is discussed explicitly in the Against Heresies by Irenaeus, if I remember correctly. If it's not in that 5 book writing, then it's in his other writing, which is the Demonstration of the Apostolic Preaching, which is a mini book, kind of what you should be taught as a believer before you are immersed in his name. All right. So give me just one moment. All right. Well, I believe this is as far as we can get for today. We will continue with our reading of the Exodus or Shemot, the liberation of our ancestors and their deliverance to them of the good news, or the covenant that was typified as a type of the renewed covenant, if you begin to see that, but it was given before the renewed covenant was given, a type and picture of things. Just like what Abraham walked out was walked out in his children later on, very same phenomenon, still happening all the time. That is how reality works. And those that are partakers of the truth can see this more clearly because it's functioning with you always walk out what's in the truth. You might not be the old man who has a child in his old age, like Abraham or Zechariah or Noach, but that is a pattern that echoes. All the different patterns that echo through history, you can see play out in those that are partakers of the truth. That's the wonderful thing that I can encourage everyone that is a sincere believer to look into for yourself. What part are you playing in the grand scheme of truth? Because we're all part of his body. You're either going to see yourself there legitimately or you're not. And if you're honest, then you'll know that you have some work to do. But either way, that's all we have for today. You all have a wonderful Sabbath, a great week ahead, Shavua Tov, and we will see you next time. Thank you for your time, and Yahuwah be with you.